Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I think this is going to be a very interesting and, you know, uh, insightful hour. We're going to have a conversation with Craig Cook, who's the principal of Woodstock School, and with Jonake Bose, who graduated in 1981, and she's on our board of directors at Woodstock School. And um, I'm Bruce Davis, the president of Friends of Woodstock School, the current president, and I have with me Glenn Conrad. Glenn, just as everybody already, most of you know, just was honored in our virtual reunion with the presentation of a scarf and and a distinguished alumni award for the most recent year. Um, Glenn and I are going to ask questions, or we're going to lead a conversation with Craig Cook and with Jonake about how Woodstock got through the pandemic, where it's headed over the next 5 years, some uh, some classic perpetual issues of that actually came up in the very first session of this virtual reunion, where Ashok Chatterjee was leading the discussion. People were asking questions about identity and diversity at Woodstock, and those are, every generation, or not even every what practically every year, people come along and ask those questions. So they've been asked and answered many times before. It's good to always ask and answer these questions. So I, I wanted to maybe just to start this off. I'm going to ask a question to Craig, and then I'll let Glenn ask, and then we'll just let the conversation flow. But Craig, Woodstock seeks, one of the cores right now, Woodstock seeks to promote global citizenship. And I wanted to know, what does that, tell us what that means is from your point of view and the Woodstock staff's point of view.
Thanks for joining us today, wherever you're coming from, and thanks for your interest in our community as it's ever evolving, always dynamic, and certainly paying attention to the changing world helps us understand what global citizenship and intercultural learning is. Our old tagline used to be educating for a world of difference, and I still think that holds true. That's really what it means to understand difference, to understand the other, and to work effectively in that. What I tell staff and students all the time, we live in an ever more fragmented world, as we all know. And so how to navigate that effectively as a leader, as an adult, is really what we're trying to do to prepare students for that role as global citizens, that meaning you pay attention to the local and also how it interacts with the global structures that we all inhabit. One of the exciting things I want to tell the group about too is that we have our reaccreditation cycle coming up, and that's going to be a synced visit education and know about accrediting bodies and processes, right? 3 in 1 sounds like a good deal, as opposed to 3 that are progressively coming out. So Council of International Schools leads it, and of course we are part of the International Baccalaureate Organization. That's the second one, and then Middle States Association is a third. So they're all syncing together. We actually are going to have our September, just about a year from now, and then after that, about a year, we'll have the full visit. But what Council of International Schools has allowed us to do, because of our health, actually, not every school community gets this opportunity, but they gave us two different pathways to choose. One is the traditional model of accreditation of meeting standards, but the second one was to focus on some capacity building areas, specifically 3 to 6 projects that they would like us to work on as our accreditation process and outcome. And CIS, Council of International Schools, which is recognized around the globe as a leader in this area, they have 4 domains such as teaching, learning, well-being, And we've chosen the Global Citizenship and Intercultural Studies track as our second accreditation visit. So that's where we're heading in the next couple years as a major focus. So what are 3 to 6 projects that we can build around that kind of theme? One of those I'll just kind of tease you with. Right after graduation in May, 16 of us went out to some land in Songcrete, which I've been to before, and we're calling the idea Woodstock at the River Unplugged. And that is the idea that first to get students unplugged, and then secondly, unplugged from their devices for and a more immersive time, 2 weeks, say. And then also to have a co-curricular humanities piece that's related to peace building in the context of interfaith religious dialogue and identity. More than ever, again, one has to situate themselves in the larger stream of events that are going around them in the world, I think, to be effective. And so Woodstock as an international school really needs to be a leader in this area of, or has the opportunity to be, in terms of interfaith identity politics related to religion, especially in the South Asian context, in the Indian context, in the regional context, and the world context. So those are some, just some of the, we had a facilitator that helped us both envision and articulate a vision statement for what that might look like. So that's just one way, educating for a world of difference.
Thanks, Greg. Glenn.
If Craig, if you don't mind, and let me pose this question to you, and then have Jonake chime in later on the board's perspective. To pull back a little bit and really, rise up from 7,000 feet and go up to 10,000 feet and look down at Woodstock from that height. I mean, what do you see just generally as the 1, 2, 3 biggest challenges that you think are actually facing the school right now or over the next couple of years?
Sorry, Glenn, you just broke up right when you got to that sentence. What do you from the
what do you see as the 2 or 3, from a really broad perspective and generalizing, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing the school now or over the midterm, the immediate and midterm future?
Sure. Well, the one top priority really is diversification, both of staff and of students. And what does that mean, right? It's constantly helping the board and the community to be able to articulate what does diversity mean, right? And as Ashok Chatterjee brought up in a very cogent point the other day, was why are we talking about diversity now if we weren't talking about diversity yesterday? And excuse me if hope I'm not putting words in his mouth, but that was the nature. So we have to always define what the diversity is. It could be socioeconomic diversity, it could be passport holders, it could be ethnicity, of course. And so, when you go around talking to alumni, of course, the diversity piece was one of the greatest attributes, if not the greatest, of your schooling experience as alums. So that when I came in 3 years ago, that was the #1 priority. And of course, the pandemic made it even harder to do, just because there was less mobility in that sense, both among staff and of students recruiting from distant places. We lost whole chunks of demographic groups of students from particular places because they, especially in our second wave of the pandemic, were really not willing to send their kids to where we were. So coming out of that, we're already seeing a reverse of the trend. Yes, we're still in the pandemic, but we've worked hard this last spring to really address that diversity piece. We're starting regionally and hope to go beyond that, but we were in Nepal, and even within India, the diversity represented in India, which is vast, from the Northeast to Assam to down south in Pune, right? The world's changed, and these kind of categories that we maybe used to use, I think, are no longer relevant. So this fall, we're going to Bhutan and we're going to Korea and among other places. So we'll, we're keeping that effort alive. So the diversity was 3 years ago. It was in former strategic plans, and even more so now. So that's what we're doing. Our director of admissions, Vidur Kapoor, is really working hard as this team, also with our advancement team led by Katie Jo Walter and myself, to really see that happen. So that's the number one thing. Another one emphasis, which you'll see in the strategic plan, is well-being of everybody, right? Well-being of staff, well-being of students. You have, everybody's so eager to come back face to face, so you have those dynamics. But at the same time, you have this efficiency of the online world that we experienced for 2.5 years. And so for staff, those worlds can sometimes collide. For students, in front of a screen. So bringing everybody back into community, building a culture that cares about each other, and learning how to be human again, in a sense, in a face-to-face way, is certainly going to be a challenge. And mental health needs and social emotional well-being for everybody is also, I would say, that's like a number 2 priority. And there are many other priorities after that come through, but I'll let Jonake, as you said, speak to any others that she might want to bring from a board perspective. And I'm really glad that you have both board representation and Jonake and me here, because it's that relationship is so important for the success of any school community. And I'm very pleased to report that that's a very strong relationship. So Jonake, thanks for being here.
So I when Glenn asked this question, I just kind of wrote down my 3 challenges, thinking, okay, Craig and I thinking the same way. And I have to say, it was pretty much the same 3 challenges. One thing I will also say before I talk about the challenges is as a board member, I'm always curious and interested in hearing about the pulse from the alumni community of how things are going and things. Sometimes there's misperceptions, sometimes they're real perceptions. And so it would be really helpful if people want to ask questions or things on the chat. We're happy to kind of be honest and authentic in our responses. And if there are things that we don't know the answers to, I don't know, Craig and I can, take it back and try and work through it together and see, how to address this. But I think in general, from my perspective, so I've only been on the board of Woodstock for a year. I was on the general body before. This year will be my first year. But from a financial health perspective of the school, not advancement and fund development and those kinds of areas, but just from a school being in a financially viable space, I think the school is in a good place. And so one doesn't have to worry. I know 10 years ago or something, I talked to some alumni, people worried about financial health, and that is not one of our challenges. I think our challenges are right along the lines of what Craig said, diversity of staff. So getting an international and diverse staff and students. And the students, it's not just Indian students, but I think there's been a lot of people from North India. So even getting people from South India or Western India, or Eastern India is equally important. So that's the diversification. If you take it from an ethnic piece, I think as related to the strategic plan, we are also trying to be much more intentional about how we define diversity, which is what Craig spoke to. So you've got socioeconomic and, all sorts of diversity, I think, is what we need to be much more intentional about now. And so there's diversity of staff, diversity of students, and it's okay if there's turnaround of staff every 2 or 3 years. I think teachers come, move. Nowadays, people transition. So it's okay if people move on. So, but just making sure we have new ideas and fresh ideas. So diversity of staff and students, mental wellness, as he mentioned. I think advancement. So when I think of advancement and development and building a community within Woodstock, the FWS community is a very tight, strong community, but trying to get that going in other parts and getting us to be kind of one integrated global community would be something that, I don't think it's a major challenge, but I think it would be something that we would want to strive for. And then the International Baccalaureate is something that the school has embarked upon. And we just need to be mindful that we don't lose all the other really good things about Woodstock, like the music and the arts and all, and we just don't have academics be the tail wagging the dog, so to speak. Craig, I don't know if you want to correct me on any of that, but I think that's something we want to be very intentional and deliberate about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective as alumni, I think that's an interesting thing. I was going to bring it up later, but since you've gone there, talk to us about the IB a bit. In my conversations with many alumni, I don't know what the word would be. People are a little queasy about it. You know, it's sort of what are the implications of this? Does it make us just another run-of-the-mill school? Is it crowding out extracurriculars? And on and on. I'm sure you've heard some of those concerns. Could you just flesh out a little bit what your thoughts are about that, both from the administration and the board?
Sure. Well, the IB is, internationally recognized standard of really international education. And so there's no reason for it not to be able to fit into Woodstock's educational legacy as being holistic and all that. You know, we're in a market of India's the third highest IB school population, just in terms of sheer number of IB schools in any country in the world. And so you've got a certain flavor or brand that comes out of that. But Woodstock, as you know, I believe we all know, is a fairly strong flavor itself. And to localize that IB curriculum into what we want to accomplish in a holistic sense at Woodstock still goes. And so, I tell people all the time, we're not a test factory. Testing is one way to measure your success, but we have all kinds of other measures at Woodstock to achieve that. One of the things we're trying to pivot to actually is also to not make our own Woodstock diploma, which we do offer, make that as robust as possible. So that's one of the key educational foci of this year, to make sure that that is there in place as well, so that students have options as well. Because we have some students that may not be interested in IB, and we need to recognize that. So that I think some of the angst that's come, in a sense, before I got here, was really in a sense the process that was had in terms of going to the IB and how that all went down. So we're fully committed to it. Again, it's a world standard, and yet we're not going to lose our identity in that. No way. So Jonake, I'll let you address that from the board side.
Yeah, I have nothing more to add on that front. I think we're going to make it as robust as possible and look at the holistic set, not lose sight of the other areas of school environment, environment and music and arts and the other extracurriculars. And I'm also now I am also a college counselor, and I know Woodstock historically has traditionally sent a lot of students to the US, and academics is not the only aspect. Extracurriculars are equally important, and I think the school continues to emphasize those elements too, as opposed to just academics. So I think, Craig, I don't think there's much of a difference in views there.
Jonake and Craig, I wanted to jump in and add to what you've said by adding a parent's perspective. And this is so interesting. Woodstock has a fantastic website, and I urge all of you to go and look at it from time to time. But I pulled this off of the website under admissions, one of the tabs. There's comments of some students and parents as to what Woodstock education experience means to them. This is what was written by a Woodstock parent from the class of 2020. Parneet Mehra wrote this. He says, "I feel being in Woodstock, my child is learning how to cope with life and many of its highs and lows within a community of peers who are going through the same, under the watchful eye of a teacher or a mentor. She's learning to be responsible for her actions. She's making friends for life with people from far and wide. She's getting world-class education from capable teachers who come to Woodstock to teach from all over the world. She's learning to be disciplined, not out of fear, but from the thought of being responsible. She is in an environment which is a home away from home, with good food to eat and great teachers and dorm parents as advisors. She's learning to be considerate and compassionate toward her peers. I think Woodstock's the best thing that could happen to her in her life at the moment. I think it's special." And when you have, this is a parent, who is so grateful for the the nurturing community of Woodstock, and that's you're getting an amazing education, Himalayan environment, but this. What's made it special for so many of us, I think, is we've made friends for life, and we got educated within a very nurturing environment. Something about the Landauer hillside soil, maybe, that got into all of us. But I love what that parent wrote, and I don't know. I think it's shared by a lot of others. But Craig or Jonake, maybe you want to expand on any of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. We're here to educate kids, even in the pandemic, engaging them in ways that are effective to help them be good digital citizens. And then, of course, coming back to campus now, again, I think parents send their kids to us, and we've just done a parent survey of incoming parents this summer. Because of that holistic approach, that they're going to learn how to live, they're going to learn how to be good citizens. So that is certainly front and foremost. And I know, Daniel, I saw you in the chat saying that I might be lagging. I don't know. I've got 4 bars that I'm in we usually don't have any problem when I'm on Zoom calls here, but I don't know. Am I lagging for other people too, or?
You're fine now. You were lagging
You're
earlier in the beginning.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I've had some lag from others, so I don't know who knows. But yeah, that's there. So Jonake, I don't know if you want to address anything on that front.
I don't know if there's anything more to add. Yep, keep going.
Here's one for you that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Are we an elite school, and does it matter?
Certainly that's the perception. And I think, historically, you look at where our recruiting efforts for, it's certainly easy to recruit from areas that have high SES patterns, and certainly geographic regions. We've just revised our grants policy to engage with our diversity in a more robust way. And so we have very clear guidelines of what that would look like. And I think that's going to really help us going forward. A lazy way to recruit students if you're just going after SES, and that's certainly not the spirit of Woodstock or what we want to convey.
And I'm sorry, I'm not.
What is SES? What is, Craig? What is SES?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that abbreviation.
Craig, what is SES?
Socioeconomic status? Is that?
Oh
yeah, socioeconomic status, right? So so that's our trajectory. Certainly that's a charge to be leveled. That's certain part of our student demographic, but in no way do we hold that spirit, I would say.
So Glenn, to speak to that, so 40 years ago, it was also perceived that way as far as when I left Calcutta, that it was an elite school because it was an American school. That said, I said we're working on the strategic plan that you've also been a part of, and it hasn't been approved. But one of the things that we want to be very intentional about is defining the word diversity and having that socioeconomic diversity component be very, very much a part of it. So things might have pivoted a little bit more, also due to the pandemic, also due to kind of lots of North Indians. And I think we're planning on hoping to be much more intentional about the diversity, both socioeconomically and ethnically, and other types of diversity too. So I'm,
Yeah, I think that's relevant. I think that's relevant, and often it seems to me that this question of elite, are we an elite school and aren't we, boils down to the other issue that we talked about yesterday about the price points and the fact that the reality, or the perception, I suspect it's reality, maybe you could comment on that nobody but fairly well-off kids can really afford Woodstock anymore. I've heard that even from people all over the world. How is that troubling? Isn't it? How can it be addressed? How could this organization help address that? Things like that.
Yeah, no, I would say again, our new grants policy really. Right? Are you an elite school, especially when it comes to the, say, tuition comparisons, right? It's all relative. Certainly compared to the 80s, yes, the tuition costs more, but relative to other boarding schools, relative to other schools in our stratosphere, so to speak, are charging more, right? If you want a Woodstock education, actually, you can.
Craig, you did lag right there, and it was sounded interesting. You said if you want an education, and then you went quiet.
Yeah, at Woodstock, it's not the tuition should not stop you from coming to Woodstock and being a student. That's not going to be a hurdle, actually, because we have a strong grants committee that looks at all kinds of data points to ascertain what parents can afford. And so the fact that to me we've structured it so that students of all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds can come to Woodstock. So
yeah, I don't think tuition, and Glenn, to be honest, I was actually quite surprised. Aside from Woodstockers saying tuition is very, or alumni or whatever saying Woodstock tuition is very high in the community. So I'm just talking Palo Alto, and I've had some people move back to India. And they say for boarding schools, Woodstock is actually quite good compared to comparable schools, boarding schools, international in Southeast Asia and in India. So I'm talking comparable, right? So I wouldn't just jump onto that bandwagon automatically. It would be my thought, because these parents have intentionally sent their students to Woodstock because they thought the education was good and the price point was good, and they also said they don't see that much of a drug problem. Craig could speak to that, but I was glad to hear these good things about Woodstock. So
Craig, you'd mentioned, I think the other night, that there's like around 480 students on campus now, somewhere in that figure, which is near capacity, and which is, I think, is wonderful, fantastic, because it had dropped during the pandemic, obviously significantly, but
yeah, we were at 430 last year, 430, and then 483. I think we were at 450 when I arrived 3 years ago. So, but
I noticed, actually, so maybe you could speak to this. I noticed last year in reading through some material that I read that was provided by Woodstock, that almost half of the students were new to campus in August of 2021. So a year ago, there were a lot of new students joining Woodstock. A lot left, graduated, or because of the pandemic, there was Woodstock started a school year with almost half its students sort of new to Woodstock. It sounded like that. If 200 out of 430, and I'm just wondering how the challenges then to carrying on Woodstock traditions and so on when you have such a large turnover in student population. Could you talk to that?
Sure. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's a whole culture building challenge, but opportunity more than anything else, right? Certainly traditions, rituals get handed down class by class. And so actually last spring's class, we only were really here half of the semester. So it was quite a semester in terms of cramming a lot of things in a short amount of space. So we're actually looking forward to having a full semester this coming semester in that way. But culture building, right? So we spent every day of our staff retreat talking about culture building. We're talking about culture building with students on every front at assemblies, with homeroom heads, with their homeroom advisors. So yeah, in a sense, you could say post-pandemic for all schools are rebuilding culture, because obviously for 2.5 years, culture looked quite a bit different in terms of how you learn and how you engage with each other. So yeah, it's a process, and that goes on and on infinitum. So even if you had a static situation at Woodstock where there wasn't a rupture such as a pandemic, you're still always culture building in your practices as you go forward. So that's what we're doing, but we're looking at it as an opportunity to really reset, and that's been our message as we even have all of our students come back at the start of a school year for the first time in 3 years. So
thanks. Actually, I want to add one more quick little, speaking of culture building, I was in the video where Jamie was giving a overview of the Center for Imagination. She talked about the Festival of Ideas that Woodstock holds. And this is where kids get to show little projects that they've worked on and so on. And it, I don't know why, but it made me think about in my day, we had the hobby show. You know, we'd bring in moss gardens and beetle collections and stamp collections and stuff. You know, we had our own little festival of ideas, which was our hobby show, I think. But it's a, you know, talk about modern, you know, modern version of something old, you know. It's a tradition. Anyway, I thought that was so interesting.
It might be interesting to turn to some of the questions that are popping up in the chat column. I see that when Margot had an interesting, Margot Warner, when I worked at the College of Worcester, one of the things was we want to attract the kind of students that can't afford to come here. And that's an interesting approach. And she says maybe that applies to Woodstock too. But obviously critical in all that is the whole issue of scholarships that you began to address. And a number of people have posed questions in the chat about sort of the statistics of how many kids are getting scholarships, whether that number is higher or lower than historically is the case. And could you attach any numbers to the grants program you've mentioned a time or two?
Yeah, I think Katie Jo answered that at around 25%. Actually, we'll have to get Vitter on that, the exact thing. We've actually expanded it. So I would probably say it's a bit higher than that in terms of some kind of support, especially in the pandemic, because all kinds of families were impacted negatively by the pandemic. And so I would really say right now, over half are, slightly over half are on some kind of scholarship, reduced, you know, tuition program. I can get that number from Vitter, the exact number. Okay. But was there another question as a part of that?
Well, I think there's some that are implied. One question I would have is how much of that grants program is in the form of actually funded programs where the revenue stream is still coming into the school, and how much of it is in the form of tuition remissions? Because I do recall that back in the 80s, for example, when the school was in a financial crisis, it turned out that almost 50% of its theoretical revenue simply wasn't coming in. It was being given away in tuition remissions. So it wasn't as though there was an endowment that was actually providing a revenue stream that was coming in. It was just lost revenue. And what's the situation with that now? And that obviously leads on to another question that came up in the chat is the status of any endowments being held by the school that might sort of be relevant to this whole situation.
Yeah, and that's very actually Katie Jo Walters here too. Katie Jo could address some of that, but we had have our Scholars for Peace program. Some of you are very aware of that for these last years, and the board asked us 2 years to start an endowment to be able to make that sustainable going forward. So that's something that we are working on. Our advancement office and myself, we have 4 Scholars for Peace students right now. So we had to reduce that because the board wanted us to kind of gradually start with 2 students per grade. And so gradually we'll see that rise to previous numbers around 18 or so, but that must be sustained by an endowment. So that's the key endowment effort that we are hoping to highlight for our alumni, and because it really makes our campus a richer place. But that's just one of the ways, and that's also embedded in our new grants policy. All kinds of other ways for people serving in various capacities that tie into our history, in terms of granting scholarships to them so that they can their kids can study at Woodstock. Katie Jo, did you want to add anything to that, or Jonake as the chair of the advancement committee?
I would just add that going to the question of how well is that funded. I know that I recently heard from our director of finance that about 12 to 13% of what we receive in tuition does go back into providing scholarships. And so that is something that we are looking to kind of supplement with an endowment for scholarships in the future.
Are there any restrictions on holding endowments in India in these days? I know for a while there was this rumor going around that the Indian government prevented you from actually assembling a large endowment. I don't know what the reality of that is. Is anyone on the call that can address that?
Well, that's right. That's part of our research, Glenn, and trying to figure that out. I think that also explains why we've been around for 168 years, going into 169, and that hasn't happened yet. So
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I
Keep in
do know
mind,
that,
Daniel, that's a good question. Thanks in the chat on in terms of publishing, scholarship and who gets that. That would be something that provide.
So, folks, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to monitor my screen here. I'm going to open it up a little bit to the participants on this Zoom call. So if you want to ask Jonake or Craig a question, raise your hand, and we'll try to let others jump in here and have this broaden this discussion. So,
Craig, there was a question on the chat about middle school and high school enrollment and the proportion. I think someone asked that. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, we have, so out of our 483, we had about 200 in the 11th and 12th grade, which is not full high school, but that's the diploma program. The diploma program of the IB is a 2-year program. So we had 200 and then on down. We have about 35 in our early years program. So 235, that leaves about 250 in the grade 6 to 10 area. So someone asked me to undo my background, but we'll see if that helps at all. Usually I don't have any problem talking from this, and I've got 4 bars, so we'll see if that helps any lag issue.
So Craig, was it 250, 6 to 10th grade, and then 250 in the 11 and 12?
200 in 11 and 12, and then about 35 in the EY early years program. Yep.
Greg, how is Woodstock viewed in the broader sort of Missouri community and Missouri Dehradun community, let's say, these days?
Yeah. Well, the best thing is to ask those people that are in that community. I know I did an interview recently with one of our parents who's a journalist, and some of you have seen that article in GQ India on Missouri and some of the cosmopolitanisms of that. The danger of any community that's been around a long time is to be myopic, I feel like, and to not, engage with outside, but we still have a strong community engagement program. Part of the strength of the IB program is the community action service component, which helps us to engage with the larger community, both very locally and regionally. So there's all kinds of stuff going on locally. Mrs. Sanjaya Mark continues to head our community engagement program. In schools and hospitals, in particular communities. And our students really are leaders in all this, even during the pandemic, wherever they were located. So many of them were engaged in helping communities that were adversely affected by the pandemic. And so, we always want to be looking out. And if you're preparing students to be educating for a world of difference, global citizens, you have to pay attention to what's around you. I probably stick on that more than any other message, and if you're going to care about an issue, care about the least of these, care about those that are vulnerable in our communities. And so that's a message we'll continue to practice and to give to our students. And
if you have a question, wave your hand or
Deshant.
Yeah, so I wanted to just actually say it's a great thing that the endowment is being looked at. That's a commentary I've really tried to foster with other reunions that I've been to. But I think that needs to be taken very seriously, and there needs to be a lot of momentum behind that. I don't know if the school is doing enough to raise money from alumni, but I've even volunteered time to do that with people I've met. But with the amount of students that have actually come back to the US, I can tell you, I haven't gotten one inbound email or call on the subject where people have actually talked to me about this. Now, the great thing is, in the last 5 years, from an internet, social media capability, there's been tremendous improvements done. I think what you need is a very market-facing team or a handful of guys or gals that can talk to the alumni to help build up the endowment, as well as be much more actively in touch with the folks, especially in the class of the 80s, 90s. These are guys and gals that are at the peak of their earning capacity. They need to be reached out to. They need to be actively involved in the endowment funding programs. And I'd like to just understand in due course what will be done to strengthen that effort.
Yeah, that's great
So-
comments. Yes, go ahead, Jonake.
Do you want me? So, Dushyant, a couple of things. So I happen to be the chair of the advancement committee. I've just recently gotten that responsibility, I would say maybe 3 months ago. Katie Jo has joined us since February. She is fabulous. I really enjoyed working with her. So she's the director of advancement at Woodstock. And we are working hard on this. We're very much in the early stages. One of the things that Craig and Katie Jo have done this summer has been traveled. I think Craig mentioned he had been to like 25 cities in a short period of time. So trying to meet up with with alumni in the US, connecting with people and getting to know. So I think this endowment, it's complicated. It's not so easy to work through. You've hit on some of the key points like communications and marketing. Craig, I know, has hired a person for communications. So all of this is in the works. I'm like in 6 months, I could give you more of a concrete thing, but today I don't feel like, I know we're working on this and this is a priority.
Perfect.
But I can't give you that much. I don't know, Craig or Katie Jo, if you want to speak to it more concretely on this topic.
Sure. Yeah, actually, our director of communications, Kenton Beachy, who also is an alum, is here on the call as well. So you'll get to know Kenton further. But yeah, those are all excellent points, and it's interesting in terms of fundraising. You hear a lot of different things out there, and there's a certain ethos that's been out there historically. So sometimes it's like, what's alumni and don't ask us for money and these kinds of things. But we're aware of what a rich, not in a monetary sense, but also in some cases a rich community that we're a part of. And so
well, to that point, sorry, I was going to mention, you don't necessarily have to donate while you're even alive. You can put it in your trust as well. And there may be a point in which you get great tax breaks for your family, which you'd have to pay to Uncle Sam if you actually donated to your school. So there are different ways in which to do this. But anyway, I think I've made the point there. The other point I just wanted to say that as commentary. It's not about, when I brought up the point last time about diversity and talked about my class of 83, where there were 32 different nationalities represented out of a class of 75 or so. It's not about all giving out scholarships to numerous people in order to make it more affordable. Yes, it is on a slightly higher price point, but again, the comment I made about the class of 2022 and just going through and the details on where these kids were coming in from and who they were. I think that you have to get the revenue in from the majority of the kids, but there may be 10% to 15% where you open it up to a diverse program whereby, for instance, I don't see one person, like we used to get kids from the American
we lost him, I think.
We lost the show.
Yeah.
Daniel has his hand up.
I know, Daniel, you have your hand up. Why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Daniel Swarup, class of 2019. I just had a question on a few points that you had made earlier regarding the three most difficult things or the things that you want to work on. And I know that the first one was to increase diversity, and then the second one was mental health efforts. I just wanted to, for so I graduated recently, and as a boarding student, I think we all know how stressful it can get as your first time being in a boarding school away from your parents and all. And I think what's a bit concerning is that if we're putting mental health and just mental well-being on the second number, then we're trying to just get more students in without really concentrating on how the students who are in our community, how they're performing and how they're doing. So I just wanted to know, what are the efforts currently going on in school because as we all know, the pandemic has hit hard for everybody in every sense, with isolation and being away and things like that. So what is the school doing to, if you will, reintroduce these students into a community such as Woodstock?
Yeah, just because it was the second thing I mentioned doesn't mean it's not a priority, because you'll see this in the strategic plan. It's there. Two very practical material things is we've hired more boarding parents. So we're up to 4 additional boarding parents. We also got board approval to hire a psychiatrist as well to work alongside of our personal counseling department. Of course, we already have a resident medical officer, but those are 4 very material, pieces. On top of that, we're constantly training our staff, our head of personal counseling, and our other member, the current personal counseling staff. They're always busy with students. That's their priority, but they're also training our staff members. We just had training and not just during staff retreat, but throughout the year. So it's a focus that we're all aware of. They go in and talk to also our homeroom heads and advisors who are very, obviously, as you know, Daniel, close to students and aware of those social emotional needs that they're experiencing now. So there's a heightened awareness in the community right now. It's not out, but I think we need to have a focus of a well-being center that's coming down the line for us to look at. But all of our decisions, at Woodstock are constrained by housing spaces, availability of hiring new staff and new programs. So you always, it's absolutely a game of prioritization. What do you need to prioritize? Because we would do so many things if we had housing available on a large scale, but we've always got to look at new positions, new issues through the lens of what's available. So I would add a third one too. I didn't get back to Glenn's original question, just that, and we touched on it some, and Deshant just also talked about it, but the diversification of fundraising efforts too. I think that's a key issue when Glenn asked me to look at from above the 35,000 foot view is changing demographics. We've been able to do 5 years of estates work and improvements in 2 years because of our partnership with Friends of Woodstock. But looking 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, that's something for the Woodstock board to make sure they are looking at. I'll often remind the board that they're the only ones in the whole Woodstock community that can afford to look after the long-term interest of the school, and that is their prime role to do that. And so certainly in this fundraising way for Woodstock to be able to thrive through the next pandemic, we're going to have to take a look at those structures that help us engage with that. Katie Jo, did you want to add anything else to that? I don't know.
I mean, just in case people are wondering what that diversification looks like, some of the different things we're looking at. And again, because I'm new and we're just getting the advancement committee going, there's not a whole lot of concrete things to point to with this, but in the coming months, there most certainly will be. So it would be corporate social responsibility fundraising here within India, where there is a law where companies are mandated to give a certain percentage of their profits out in charity. And so we would apply for that funding, most likely from companies that are owned by alumni who align with Woodstock's goals. And then also ASHA grants, which are the American schools and hospitals abroad through the US government. Those grants are available. Also, just simply merchandising and kind of alumni charity events and activities. We're looking at, concerts, potentially a motorcycle tour through India, golf events, things like that can be used to raise money for the school as well.
Great, thanks.
The other thing, if I can add on the advancement end, is it is a very small advancement team at Woodstock. It's 3 people. Actually, right now it's 2 people with a posting for a third. So
Yeah.
my philosophy and what I've encouraged Katie Jo is that we're going to leverage volunteers, primarily alumni. So appreciate you guys being there to kind of help us with this, because I think the only way for us to do it is to tap into this community that we have to help us with get there. So thank you for that in
Yeah, and
advance.
Jonake, you're very right. You mentioned earlier how complicated it can get, and I wish we hadn't lost Deshant, because I wouldn't want to aim this at him, but it can be very complicated. And if you're hunting for a tax break, of course, in your will, as he suggested, the problem, of course, is giving money to Woodstock since this is the Friends of Woodstock School in the United States, it's not exempt. So if that's motivating you, it can get very complicated, and you'll need to talk to Katie Jo or to the Wheelers. But since this is the FWS/WOSA America reunion, let me bang the drum a little bit and say that if anybody is dying to set up a endowment or a scholarship or any of that kind of stuff to address any of these problems, FWS knows how to do it, and that's what it does. And it has a endowment, and all that money ends up benefiting Woodstock. So don't wait for the advancement committee to sort of take the initiative. FWS,
Right.
FWS will be happy to take your money right now.
Yeah,
So,
but I don't think it's going to be abused. I mean, the whole idea is to be, I don't want to say, Glenn, that, I mean, if we take the money, it's going to be responsibly used also, because I think we all go through that in a very distinct, but I also think for the endowment particularly, you've got to raise a significant amount of money, like millions, to be able to get the returns you need to support that. So it takes work, and it's not something, I mean, we are fortunate we've got Katie Jo, who's got some experience. Danny Lacey is on the advancement committee. He's got a lot of experience there. But you need to be at it consistently, and it takes knowledge on that. So I don't mean to pass it off. It's a high priority for me as on the board, my role on the board. So I take that responsibility seriously, but it's not that easy to kind of.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to suggest, I didn't intend at all to suggest that you were doing that. I was simply trying to make the point that there are already, a beginning has already been made if you're impatient.
Right. And we can, and we want to leverage what's been done.
There are mechanisms.
Okay.
There's also a liar tree society, I think, for estate planning purposes. So there's that. So I think the stuff is there. We just need to tap into it and kind of develop it more. Is, I think, the work that needs to be done.
Okay.
Didn't mean to cut you off, Glenn, but
No.
I'm going to jump in here, Glenn. I want to recognize David Wheeler. He's had his hand up a long time.
sorry.
That's right.
Thank you, Bruce.
Bruce,
I thank you. I just wanted to continue what Glenn said. For those of you in North America, while we wait for Woodstock to create this endowment, and we will certainly support that and do what we can, FWS has 5 named scholarship endowments that enable students to attend Woodstock School. We work with the admission office to identify qualified students. So every year, FWS, through the donations of alumni who created the endowments and the charitable annuities that were used in some of them, we make 5 scholarships every year to students to help them go to Woodstock School. FWS also has a general scholarship fund that supports merit scholarships and also what we used to think of as our SAGE program for students who have a family tie to Woodstock School. So if you want to support right now, please visit our website. You're welcome to donate to any of these scholarship funds. And as Glenn mentioned, if you want to set up an endowment, please, by all means, contact our office and we'll be more than happy. We just created a new endowment just moments ago based upon a charitable annuity. So please don't hesitate to contact our office or any of the board members. We're more than happy to help you work and either support existing endowments or create new endowments.
So
David, could you put the link in the chat for the endowment?
I'm
So that
sorry.
people, could you put the link in the chat?
They're on our website.
Oh, they're all right on the
Yes,
website.
I'm sorry. If you visit our website under donate, all of our funds are talked about, and you can explains the qualifications. And so, yeah, please. And Bruce has mentioned this. There's so much information. I was thinking back on the question of Canadian Friends. Canadian Friends, FWS, and Woodstock have wonderful websites. And there's information on the Woodstock website and the FW website on what Canadian Friends is all about and how to donate to them. So please take advantage of the websites. Everyone works hard to keep them current. There's lots of wonderful information on all of these websites. So yeah, thank you.
Marianne, you have your hand up.
I just have a question about, I know I was involved with FWS before it was FWS, going back a long way, and before WOSA North America. But there was an issue for a long time with both from the Indian standpoint and from the US standpoint in terms of money going to India. Am I understanding that this endowment is one that's going to be set up in India for scholarships versus scholarship funds set up with FWS?
That's what we're trying to figure out right now.
Are there any problems with currency going back and forth? I'm familiar with another nonprofit working with village Christians in North India, where they have education, but because they also are a Christian organization, and they have the two separated very carefully, but they're having a really tough time with the Office of Currency getting permission to transfer funds from the US to India.
If I may ask, if anyone has expertise, yeah, if anyone has expertise in this area and has done this effectively and successfully, do reach out to me and share with me, and I'm happy to share with Katie Jo, and we can kind of tap into if anyone has expertise in this.
Yeah, but Marian, I think that the issue you're talking about is the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act, where institutions have to go through a lengthy and arduous process with the Indian government to get clearance to receive those funds from outside, and Woodstock School actually has that. Yeah, so we can.
You can get that. You can do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also, please be aware that the United States right now is in the process of many people pushing for laws, and their laws regarding allowing charities to raise money for any foreign situation is coming under a lot of scrutiny.
You know, that all ties back to one thing that we didn't raise, but that's been sort of skirting around the edges. And because there are some, I mean, the central government in India has in fact required everybody to establish their FCRA account at the state bank branch in Delhi, which has moved the whole situation that you're referring to, Marian, back about 15 years. For about 10 years, things were really good when we were working with Axis Bank and ICIC and HBC, but now it's back to State Bank of India, and some of these old problems are rearing their head, which begins to get at some of the stuff like Ashok was talking about. And it might be interesting to hear Craig and Jonake comment recently about the political environment and the threat and the sort of Indian version of the culture wars, and how all that is. I mean, how much of that we've talked a lot about how it is a threat. It's a present threat to minority and civic groups and civic societies in India. And how much of that are you feeling in the day-to-day life of Woodstock? To what extent does that make you nervous when you get up in the morning, or is it a more distant threat that's manifesting itself in things like what Marian is raising?
Yeah, I mean, others on this call could answer that, I'm sure, just as effectively. But from our perspective, where I sit, it's a distant thing to be aware of. You have secret service or security agents come randomly and interview you, what your motivations and why are you here in India. You get certain documents from the government that you have to buy and put in your library. Have to, I mean, this is all relative, but you know, so it's there. I know the Christian community feels very threatened, I would say, from my conversations. So it's something you have to be aware of. Mostly in the pandemic and the day-to-day time, I do feel like we are a focus of, for example, we just come out of a small containment zone in one part of our community staff housing because we had 5 cases. So I'm not sure other schools on the hillside here in Missouri are getting that kind of scrutiny. So it's just something to be aware of, but we always attempt to have good relations with the local government, but sometimes that's out of our hands as well. And there's other dictates coming from further away. So. Yeah.
I am going to jump in here for a second. We have passed our allotted time. I know that we could keep going for a long time, but we're also going to be having a lobby open conversation later this afternoon. We have another panel coming up very shortly. So I'm, sadly, I'm going to end this, but I want to thank Jonake and Craig so much for for
Our pleasure.
sharing their thoughts on where things are these days. And Glenn, it's always nice to see you and be with you. And everybody, thank you so much for joining this panel. We're going to bring it to a close, but please join the lobby after the next 2 sessions. And Sharon, can you unmute yourself? The next site, I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, the next one is, it's Dorm Life, Forged in the Foothills, presented by some fairly new alumni graduate classes of 2013 and 2014, and ably facilitated by Priyanka Das from the committee. So
and then after that, why don't you quickly
after that, at 3 p.m. Eastern time, noon Pacific time, is Sparking Memory. It's a writing workshop run by Mary Firebrand Gerard, and that'll be very fun. And then that will lead into a lobby directly. So even if you aren't a writer, people will be able to just get sparks, and people will be able to share live. So that'll be fun. The Sparking Memory will be very fun.
Jonake?
I was just going to share, I haven't been back to Woodstock campus for a long time, since 2016, and I'll be there. Bruce will be there in 2020. So I think we might have more information for people like this after that, if you'll ever want to do a session, in October or something like that. I just wanted to offer that out there.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So join the lobby at 4. We'll recap this session, some of the other sessions, plenty of time to ask and answer questions, and just informally talk about how this amazing virtual reunion has gone. I've really enjoyed every session I've been in so far. I hope you've enjoyed them too. We'll see you at the next session or in the lobby. Thanks a lot for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining. Thank you, Bruce and Glenn, Jonake.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I won't be able to join anymore just because I'm out and the thing, but thanks for this.
Yeah, enjoy Quebec.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank